One of the chief merits of Tom Carhart's fast-paced narrative is the new light it sheds on Custer. Almost all Americans have heard of Custer, but most associate him with one disastrous day in 1876 at Little Bighorn in Montana, when his entire command was wiped out. Few realize that he emerged, beginning at Gettysburg, as one of the best Union cavalry commanders in the Civil War. Now, thanks to Tom Carhart, we will have a new understanding of Custer, who led 2 mounted charges against Stuart's horsemen, shouting, "Come on, you Wolverines!" to the men of the 1st and 7th Michigan Cavalries. Why haven't we known all this before? Careful students of the battle have known some of it, but until now we have not understood how the fight at East Cavalry Field fit into the larger picture of Gettysburg. Most important, we have not previously comprehended Lee's full tactical plan for July 3rd, in which Stuart's cavalry was to have an essential part. No historian before Tom Carhart has pieced together the whole story from the scattered bits of evidence. Lee's and Stuart's after-action reports on the battle provide only vague and incomplete references to the plan. Understandably so, since success has 1,000 fathers, but failure is an orphan. From his own experience as a combat officer and military historian, Carhart has combined evidence and plausible inference to reconstruct Lee's plan and the reasons for its failure. Given the vast number of writings on Gettysburg, it seems impossible to come up with new information and insights about the battle. But Tom Carhart has done it. Introduction. For every Southern boy 14 years old, not once, but whenever he wants it, there is the instant when it's still not yet 2 o'clock on that July afternoon in 1863. The brigades are in position behind the rail fence. The guns are laid and ready in the woods, and the furled flags are already loosened to break out. And Pickett himself, with his long oiled ringlets, and his hat in one hand probably, and his sword in the other, looking up the hill, waiting for Longstreet to give the word. And it's all in the balance. It hasn't happened yet. It hasn't even begun yet. It not only hasn't begun yet, but there is still time for it not to begin against that position and those circumstances which made more men than Garnett and Kemper and Armistead and Wilcox look grave. Yet it's going to begin. We all know that. We have come too far with too much at stake, and that moment doesn't even need a 14-year-old boy to think, this time, maybe this time, with all this much to lose and all this much to gain. Pennsylvania, Maryland, the world, the golden dome of Washington itself to crown with desperate and unbelievable victory. William Faulkner, Intruder in the Dust, 1948. That hot, sunny afternoon, General Robert E. Lee sent 13,000 Confederate soldiers, led by Pickett's fresh division, into a grassy field soon to be spattered with their blood. Their goal was a clump of trees nearly a mile away at the center of Union defenses on Cemetery Ridge. But as they moved into the Yankees' range, their gray lines suddenly shuddered as flaming sheets of rifle fire and bursting artillery shells ripped ragged holes in their ranks. Yet they grimly closed up and kept moving forward. While many of these men did reach their goal and even broke through Federal lines, they were so weakened by that point that they were unable to hold. Forced to retreat, they were assailed once again by enemy fire as they crossed that open slaughter field. When the shaken remnants finally got back, Lee is said to have been there to greet them with his well-known apology line. "It's all my fault." But was it really? The conventional wisdom over the last century and a half has been that Lee risked everything that day. A much-needed, stunning victory over the Army of the Potomac in Pennsylvania, the survival of his own army, even, yes, the very life of the Confederacy, on a foolish attack by 9 of his 43 combat brigades launched against ranks of riflemen and clusters of cannon awaiting them in the Union line. If true, that means he was willing to gamble it all on the ability of those 13,000 men to cross a wide and open field under constant artillery and rifle fire. Their attack hurled into the teeth of the Union defenses, while his other 50,000 men sat quietly by and waited. As the title suggests, I have a different understanding of Lee's full plan that day. In particular, I hope to change the rather common but seldom considered perception that generals during the Civil War made no tactical plans the night before a battle, that they simply moved their forces forward without any specific intention beyond attacking the enemy's forces where they found them. But Lee was a lifelong student of military history, whose battlefield actions closely resembled those of the Napoleon whom he had so carefully studied and absorbed. I believe the detailed planning that consumed Lee the night before a battle was the most important action he performed as an army commander. The implementation of Lee's plans, of course, was up to his subordinate commanders, and so his ultimate goals were not always realized. But aside from what has widely been seen as his one great failure at Gettysburg, Lee's battle plans, as any careful review of his personal military history will show, are generally acknowledged to have been both bold and masterful. Despite the contrary popular perception, however, I believe I can show that to have been true at Gettysburg as well. I want readers to take a fresh look at the Battle of Gettysburg, a fight that most agree was the centerpiece of the Civil War. But it is important, at the outset, to see it as a Union victory that came after Robert E. Lee had sequentially thrashed and humiliated Generals McClellan, Pope, Burnside, and Hooker on the battlefield, causing them all to be replaced by President Lincoln as he sought desperately for a general who could defeat that Confederate colossus. It is now clear that General George C. Meade, a man who only reluctantly took command of the Army of the Potomac just a few days before the battle, was no better than those who had preceded him. In this greatest test of his military career, he knew going in that he was outgeneraled, and when looking at all his actions at Gettysburg, it seems apparent that he only hoped to somehow survive. During the 3 days of battle, awed by the myth of Lee's invincibility, he cowered with his well-armed and bountifully supplied army in hastily prepared defenses, allowing no significant offensive actions by his hunkered-down army of 94,000, surrounded by 70,000 free-ranging rebels. These are only rough estimates of the army sizes before the battle, of course, and precision here is elusive. Because of the destruction of records, arrival or departure of certain units, and casualties suffered during the first 2 days of the battle, on the morning of the third day, July 3, 1863, Meade's army had shrunk to about 80,000, while Lee's force was roughly 63,000 men. After the massive Confederate assault, remembered today as Pickett's Charge, failed to permanently pierce the Union line on July 3, 1863, the rebel soldiers who had made that attack returned to their positions on Seminary Ridge. No Union counterattack pursued them. On July 4, 1863, after 3 days of vicious combat, the two badly bled armies simply glowered at each other across a mile of open fields as they licked their wounds. That evening brought a downpour, and on the morning of July 5th, Meade awoke to find the gray sky brightened by the absence of Lee and his Army of Northern Virginia. Somehow, against all odds, Lee and his army were gone. Meade could scarcely believe what this meant. He had taken on the greatest Confederate general, maybe the greatest American general ever, in a major battle, and he had repelled his final attack and so had not been beaten. Indeed, although the Confederates had not been driven off, the naked fact that Lee had left the Army of the Potomac in control of the battlefield meant that Meade had won the battle. Over the 140 intervening